Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar and interim rector here, and I'm joined by my colleague, the Reverend Zach Niane, senior associate rector, and together we'd like to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. This morning we're having a very important conversation about Palestine, and to more fully introduce our guest, the Reverend Canon Leyla King, I'm going to turn it over to Zach.
It is my distinct honor to welcome and introduce my friend and former colleague from the Diocese of East Tennessee, the Reverend Canon Leyla King, a Palestinian American Episcopal priest and writer and advocate of small churches, a wife and mother, and the founding member of both Palestinian Anglicans and Clergy Allies and the Small Churches Big Impact Collective. She serves as the canon for mission in small congregations for the Episcopal Diocese of West Texas and is author of the forthcoming book, Daughters of Palestine, a memoir in 5 generations. And she'll be back later at 3 p.m. to offer a reading from that forthcoming book, which is already available through the St. Bart's bookstore. Here in person, you can purchase a copy in the back right here, right now from Tegan. Throughout the morning, if we have questions at the end, we would love to take them. You can fill out a question card and hand it to Stephanie Terrell here in the room, or submit them online by emailing peter@pthompson@stbarts.org, or by leaving a comment in the chat box on YouTube or on Facebook. It is especially appropriate, I think, to welcome you, Leyla, on Pentecost. If you ask a Palestinian Christian and Anglican, when did your family, quote unquote, become Christian? They will often tell you the day of Pentecost. They were there. And so, Leyla, it's a wonderful pleasure to have you. Welcome to St. Bart's.
Thank you so much. Thrilled that y'all have my book already a whole month before it is released, so take advantage of that, and I'm really grateful to St. Bart's and to all of you here for inviting me and for making the book sales happen a whole month in advance. And Father Zach actually helped you cheat a little bit already because he gave you a little clue to the quiz that we are about to take. And maybe you haven't taken a quiz in decades, but aren't you excited to take one now? And the good news is that if you get 10 out of 10 on this quiz, you go straight to heaven. So that's always exciting, right? And if you don't get 10 out of 10, you know, I don't know what to tell you. So if you don't have a quiz in front of you, there's a whole stack of them here, so please come up and grab one. And this is a very informal event. We're going to try and get through all 10 questions this morning, but I realize that we have very limited time, so we might not get through them all. I do hope and invite you to come back this afternoon, because whatever we sort of miss this morning, hopefully we will get to follow it up a little bit this afternoon. So we're going to jump right in. This is a quiz, but the quiz really frames a number of the stories that I'm hoping to tell you today. And all of these stories I really get from my grandmother, who you see pictured here. She died in 2016, but she was a big part of my life throughout my childhood and into my young adulthood. The summer after I graduated from college, she and I spent the summer together. I would go over to her house outside of Houston, and I bought one of those mini cassette tape recorders. I don't know if you remember those, that like ancient technology, right? And I sat down on the couch next to her, and I pressed record, and I just asked her to tell me about her life and the lives of our ancestors, which she knew. And these are mostly her stories, and some of mine, and some of other Palestinian Christians that I know. So we're going to jump right in, and we'll just see how you do on this quiz. So, number one, the term Semitic refers to ethnic Jews, ethnic Arabs, all of the above, or none of the above? All of the above. You're starting out strong. Well done. Yes. Here's the basic dictionary definition of Semitic: relating to or denoting a family of languages that includes Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic, and certain ancient languages such as Phoenician and Akkadian, and relating to the peoples who speak Semitic languages, especially Hebrew and Arabic. So yes, Palestinians are a Semitic people. I am Palestinian American. I was born and grew up in Houston or outside of Houston. Now it is very much in Houston because Houston has just exploded, but then it was sort of in the suburbs of Houston. I was baptized as an infant at St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church, where my family always attended throughout my childhood. We worshiped there at St. Dunstan's with my grandparents and half of my grandmother's 8 siblings. And I will go into this a little bit more this afternoon, but every Sunday after church, we went to one of my great aunt's houses for what we called coffee, with 7 of her 9 siblings were all there with their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren every single Sunday. Growing up, I didn't speak Arabic myself, and I would have to learn it when I was grown. But during that time, after I learned it, I took a couple of semesters at university. It was the extent that my university offered of Arabic. But right after that, the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion, came out. Do you all remember that? What was unique about that movie? Do you remember? It was all in Aramaic. Yeah, it was all in Aramaic because that was the language that Jesus spoke. And Aramaic is a linguistic ancestor of Arabic. So I was really excited and shocked to discover that I understood, even with my beginning Arabic, I understood about 10% of that movie. Because again, Arabs, like Arabic, is a Semitic language. Arabs are a Semitic people. Palestinians are a Semitic people. Another story I like to tell that really highlights that fact is back a couple of, maybe 10 years ago now, when AI was just starting out. I was scrolling through my Facebook feed, and I saw this picture of my cousin Joseph, who's about 10 years younger than me. And I saw this picture of Joseph, and I thought, man, when did Joseph grow a beard? Like, that looks weird. And I don't know, this is a weird picture of him. I don't know why he's posting this picture. And I kept scrolling. I think I was on my computer because it was like before I got an iPhone, a smartphone. But I kept scrolling, and then I saw that same picture of my cousin Joseph again, and I thought, why is this picture of why is he coming up in my feed all so much? And then a few, scrolls down, I saw it again, and I thought, why is Joseph posting this picture of himself over and over again? And I looked, and the person posting it was not my cousin Joseph at all, but one of my clergy friends and colleagues in the whole different part of the country. And I thought, why is this friend of mine who doesn't know my cousin posting a picture of my cousin? Like, that seems really weird to me. So then I went and I read the description beneath the picture, and it was an AI-generated picture of what Jesus would have looked like. And I thought it was my cousin Joseph, because they looked that similar. And I had to read the description over and over again, because I thought, I legitimately thought that was my cousin Joseph. So I just say that because it's just a reminder of how closely connected Palestinians, may they be Palestinian Christian or Jew or Muslim, we are the sort of biological descendants of Jesus and his disciples, right? His first followers. So we're going to move along in this quiz. Number 2, before 1948, the land that is now called Israel and the occupied territories was governed by the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, all of the above, or none of the above? All of the above. All of the above, you're right. Obviously not simultaneously, right, but one after the other. So we're going to start with the Ottoman Empire, which ruled and governed the area called Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th century. And that was the time in which my great-great-grandmother was born and grew up. Her name was Zaleh. Do I have any Arabic speakers in here? Do you know what Zaleh means? Zaleh? Zaleh? Zaleh means sorrow or upset. So her name was sorrow. Her name was upset. And it's because she was born a girl when her family wanted a boy. She was born in a town about 10 miles outside of Haifa called Shefa'amr in a family that was Catholic. She was born to a Catholic family in the last years of the 19th century when the Ottoman Empire ruled over Palestine. She was born a Catholic and she remained a Catholic much of her life, but she was married into an Anglican family. So my great-great-grandfather and his family have been Anglicans for generations. I don't know when their Anglicanism started because I don't know that far back. And there was a difference between Catholics and Anglicans, particularly around the education of women. So Catholic women tended not to be educated, whereas Anglican women tended to be educated, even in that time period. So she was married into this Anglican family of 4 brothers, 3 of whom were merchants together and all lived above their shop in this town of Shefa'amr with their families. So, it would be the market on the bottom floor and then the family lived in the apartment above. So she married into this Anglican family and her 2 sisters-in-law were also Anglican. So she was the only Catholic in this family. She was also, according to my grandmother, the most beautiful of the sisters-in-law. But she was of a different faith, and she couldn't read, whereas her sisters-in-law could. And so she was really looked down upon in the family at the time, and she really was not accepted into the family. She thought when she started having children that she would gain that acceptance. She had 2 children, a daughter first named Anissa, who would become my great-grandmother, and then a son named Anis. And she thought when Anis was born that she would finally be accepted into the family, but that never really happened, and her name followed her because not long after her son was born, World War I began. Palestinians were conscripted into the Ottoman army against their will, and her husband and one of his brothers were among those conscripted, and they very quickly sort of became cannon fodder for the Ottomans in World War I, and the family heard back that they were both killed very soon after they left. As soon as family got word that he was killed, my great-great-grandmother was put on the mourning weeds, the black mourning attire, and she was kicked out of the family home and sent back to her own family. They kept the children with them. So she was separated from her children and didn't see them again until decades later. So that sense of sorrow that she was named really did follow her all the rest of her life. But the end of World War II and also marked the end of the Ottoman Empire and Ottoman rule in Palestine. And that's when the transition of power happened from the Ottomans to the British Empire. Palestine became what's called a British mandate. And what we're talking about here is the history of colonialism, which by and large is not a good history, right? We know enough now to know that colonialism is a bad thing if you're not aware of that. I am married to a Brit, so I say that with full knowledge and love for the British people nonetheless. But I also like to complicate, and not just because I'm married to a Brit, I also like to complicate a little bit that history of colonialism. Of course it is a bad thing overall, but everything is nuanced and, human life is messy. And for Palestinians in Palestine at the time, the arrival of the British was seen as a kind of salvation because the British brought with them wealth, technology, better health care, more education in comparison with the Ottoman Empire. So in a lot of ways, especially for Christians, especially for my Anglican family, but really for Palestinians on the ground, the British Empire was something of an upgrade from the Ottoman Empire. So I just like to remember that because, again, things are rarely just black and white. So moving on to number 3, in the first half of the 20th century, the Arabs who lived in the region called Palestine practiced Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all of the above, none of the above. All of the above. Maybe you're recognizing a pattern, right? So I'll just lay that out there. So yes, all of the above and much more, right? Both in Shefa'amr, where my where my great-great-grandparents lived, and in Haifa, where my grandmother herself would eventually grow up, there would be neighborhoods of particular faiths, particular faith communities would sort of all live together in neighborhoods in the town. But it was really one community together of a mix of faiths. So Muslim, Christian, Jews, Druze, Maronites, all sorts and varieties of religions. And I want to highlight something that my grandmother really told me and that I really took in, which is that even though there was a mix and a variety of religious faiths and traditions, the whole community really participated in that life of the community together. So if there was a Christian religious festival, the whole town would come out, right? If there's a marriage or a funeral, it doesn't matter what the faith tradition of that person was, the whole community would come together to celebrate or to mark that event because they shared a culture. They might have had different faith traditions, but they shared a culture. So Muslim or Jewish or Christian, there was a wedding, they all came together and danced the debke, the traditional dance of Palestinian celebration and joy, right? All of the women, no matter what the faith tradition was, the matriarch in the town or the community would say the blessings over the couple getting married, and all the women of all different faiths and traditions would do the celebratory lulus. And I'm trying not to do it too loud because I have my microphone. Right? So that was part, oh, now I've lost my microphone. That was part of all of the faith traditions because, again, it was one community, one culture that was shared among all of these people of various faiths. Why do I want to tell you that? Because so often you will hear that the conflict that we see happening, playing out with such horror in front of our eyes now in the Middle East, in Palestine, we hear that that is a religious conflict. That is a lie. That is a bald-faced lie. This is not a religious conflict, and it never was, because there were Jews, Christians, Muslims living basically, we all, right? There's tensions everywhere you go, but just living alongside each other like they do in every other place in the world. This is not a religious conflict. And if someone tries to tell you that it is, they are selling you a lie. They are perpetuating a narrative for their own ends. This is not a religious conflict, and it never was. So what is this about? Let's move on to number 4. Zionist refers to someone who subscribed to a political movement originating in 19th and 20th century Britain. Those British, they're always doing bad things. That advocated for a homeland for European Jews in the region then known as Palestine. European Jewish militia fighters who used terrorism to force Palestinians from their homes in the years immediately before and after 1948. The belief that it is the right of Israel to maintain current and build more settlements in Palestinian territories illegally occupied by Israel, all of the above or none of the above. All of the above. You are catching on very well. Good job. So yes, all of the above. And I want to dwell on this one. I usually dwell on this one a little bit longer. I'm not going to spend too long today because I'm hoping that you'll come back at 3 o'clock and hear a little bit more of this story. But I do want to talk a little bit about what Zionism is. And when it first proliferated as a Western political movement, right? Not religious, but a political movement in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the tagline for Zionism was a land without a people for a people without a land, right? That's what the tagline was. A land without a people, meaning Palestine, for a people without a land, meaning European Jews. What's wrong with that statement? There were people in that land. My people. My people were in that land. My grandmother Bahi, my great-grandmother Anissa, my great-great-grandmother Zaleh, their husbands, their children. There were people in that land. And that is the beginning of the lie of Zionism, right there, right? When my grandparents were married in January of 1948, they went on a short honeymoon to Cairo. They came back to Palestine, and within 4 months, everyone in their newlywed apartment block was gone. They had all been disappeared or forcibly evicted from their homes, and my grandparents were the only ones left. My grandparents were the only ones that had stayed behind. And on one day, my grandmother kept telling me there was one day in April that just got too much. And I would say, but why that day, Grandma? Why did you leave on that day? And she said, it just got too much. It got to be too much. And years later, well after she had died, I was reading a book, and I found out that there was a strategic military maneuver in April of 1948 that was intended to frighten Palestinians out of their homes in April of 1948, called Operation Passover Cleansing. Do you hear that word? Cleansing. They were strategically, ethnically cleansing my people, my grandmother. It was entirely intentional. And until the day she died, she just thought there was randomly one day in April that it got to be too much. But it wasn't random. It was not at all random. So my grandparents boarded a boat at the port in Haifa, and they sailed 2 days and 1 night to Beirut. They were absolutely frightened. They had the clothes on their backs and 1 suitcase between them. My grandmother was 4 months pregnant with the baby that would become my mother. She was nauseous. She was nauseous with pregnancy hormones. She was seasick, and she was absolutely devastated and frightened. And in that moment, she prayed to God. In that moment, she was so desperate, she didn't know where else to turn. She was 20 years old, and she prayed to God that he would bring her through this moment of horror and trauma into new life. They never went back to Haifa. Until this day, none of my immediate family has ever been back to my family's home at the foot of Mount Carmel, or ever been back to our home in Haifa in Palestine. And I wish I could say that that story happened then in 1948 and then it stopped. But of course, you know that's not true. That kind of trauma continues to be inflicted on Palestinians today, both in Gaza, obviously, with the mass starvation and the bombing and the murder and killing of my people, and also in the West Bank and in Israel proper, right, where Palestinians continue to face discrimination at best, oppression, starvation, victimization over and over again, with all the additional force and power of state-run violence. I think it gets better. It's not always so depressing, I don't think, but let's move on. Number 5, Christians in Palestine today have existed in Palestine since the time of Pentecost, live in Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Israel proper, are victims of Israeli discrimination and targeted violence, all of the above or none of the above? All of the above. Well done, yes. And if you were at the 9 o'clock service, this may sound particularly familiar to you. If you're coming to the 11 o'clock service, which hopefully we will get through this in time for, you're about to hear it again. But let me read you a portion of the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem, and at the sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear, each of us, in our own native language, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs? In our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power." The Pentecost reading, right? Why might I read that to you right now? What stood out to you in that little snippet? Anything? Did you hear that bit at the end? Cretans and Arabs, right? Arabs are right there on Pentecost Day. But let me actually go a little bit further back in that Pentecost reading. At the very beginning, when the crowd starts speaking and the crowd says, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans?" Galileans. Where is Galilee? Where? Yeah, it's in Palestine. These are Palestinians, the very first disciples of Jesus. Jesus himself were from the area, the region that became known as Palestine, that even in that time period was known. If you look on maps, there is Palestine in that region. Galileans, right? The first disciples, Jesus himself, were Palestinian Jews. And this, as Zach mentioned earlier by cheating and giving you an answer, right? This is the moment to which I trace my ancestry as a Palestinian Christian. This is the moment that my people became Christian. And the stories that I have and know about the experience of Israeli apartheid and oppression in Palestine are not mine to tell, because remember, my grandparents fled in 1948. They never went back. Their Christianity, particularly their Anglicanism, gave them some access to escape those horrors in a way that many Palestinian Muslims didn't have access to. So I don't have those are not my stories to tell, but the stories are out there, and I really encourage you to look them up, to follow people on social media. There is a wonderful document written in 2009, I believe, by all the patriarchs, and they are all patriarchs in that part of the world, the heads of the Christian churches in the Holy Land, called the Kairos Palestine document. And it is really a call from Christians in the Holy Land to their counterparts and their siblings here in the West to heed their voice. And we in the West have done a terrible job of doing that, but I invite you and I encourage you to look up that document. The Presbyterians have developed a whole study guide around it. So please check that out and listen to the voice of Palestinian Christians. If you need a reminder, I did bring some stickers for your laptop or your bumper. So if you would like a sticker to remind you and others to listen to Palestinian Christians, I would be happy to give you one. So please, please do that. So we are going to try and make it through this quiz before the next liturgy starts. So we're going to push right on. Number 6, the current nation-state of Israel is a modern-day continuation of the ancient Israel, which we read about in the Old Testament, the beginnings of the fulfillment of prophecies made in the biblical book of Revelation, the Israel to which we refer in the Book of Common Prayer, and I give you an example of that, all of the above or none of the above. Oh, I tricked some of you, but some of you got it, right? This is none of the above. None of the above, right? The current nation state of Israel has nothing to do with the Israel that we read about in the Bible. Let me say that again. The current nation state of Israel has nothing to do with the Israel we read about in the Bible. Is it coincidence that it's also called Israel? No, of course not, right? Are you expected to believe that it is the same Israel that we read about in the Bible? Yes, of course you are. But it is, again, part of the lie of Zionism. Yesterday, I was at Church of the Ascension, and I met an Iranian Jew, and she was in tears of anger and frustration because she, too, and her people, as a Middle Eastern Jew, face the same kind of discrimination from Israel as Christians do, as Muslims do, right? Because she's not the right ethnicity of Jew. Right? And so I think it's just so important that we recognize that there is a vast difference between these two things, the current nation state of Israel and the Israel that we hear in our scriptures. And the reason why you might think that they have anything to do with each other is in part due to the lie of Zionism, and in part due to a particular kind of Zionism known as Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism. The Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac defines Christian Zionism in this way: a political movement that uses the Bible to justify and legitimize Israel's position of power at the expense of Palestinians. A political movement that uses the Bible to justify and legitimize Israel's position of power at the expense of Palestinians. Christian Zionism is a profound problem in Christian thought because it completely ignores and obliterates the experience and voices of native Palestinians and especially Palestinian Christians. And it is an inaccurate and uncontextualized understanding of Scripture. In other words, if you believe in Christian Zionism, if you think Israel has a divine right to exist or that land there belongs to Jews because the Bible tells us so, you are interpreting the Bible badly, and you need your priests to do some Christian education with you, right? Because that is not how we as Episcopalians understand our Scripture. Right? And actually, if you think about it, this is the only issue where the Episcopal Church interprets the Bible to apply to secular society in any other way. Right? If we think about LGBTQ rights, if we think about women's choice, right, the Episcopal Church never says, well, it says this in the Bible, and so therefore we are going to make laws to do things this way because it says that in the Bible. We never do that. We're Episcopalians, come on, right? We don't act that way. But when it comes to Israel, somehow all of that gets thrown out the window because Christian Zionism in the Episcopal Church is alive and well and deeply problematic and right now causing very serious pain to Palestinian Episcopalians like me, but also our Armenian siblings, our Middle Eastern siblings, our Iranian siblings, right? All of us are caused, it's a real betrayal. It's a real lack of understanding and seeing us for who we are, that we are here in your church, right alongside you, and we don't count, right? So it's got to be addressed in the Episcopal Church and in Christianity in the West in general. I will also point out that there is a direct link between Christian Zionism and Christian nationalism. And I don't have time to get into that, but we hear a lot about Christian nationalism now, and there is a very direct link between those two things that is a topic for Christian formation at another time. So we are going to move on to the back, number 7. Anyone who speaks up for Palestinians and calls for a free Palestine today must be Muslim, is a terrorist or a terrorist supporter, is anti-Semitic, and here I'm using that term to mean anti-Jewish, wants the eradication of Israel, all of the above or none of the above. None of the above. Now you're back on track, right? None of the above. So raise your hand if you think I'm Muslim, a terrorist, or a terrorist supporter. Glad to not see any hands raised, right? But maybe you think I'm anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic, or that I want the eradication of Israel because we have been taught to believe these things in this country, right? We have been taught to believe that if you say anything for Palestinians or anything against the nation state of Israel, that you are automatically anti-Semitic. I'm happy to address some questions later, hopefully, if we have some time, okay? So maybe you think that I am anti-Jewish or want the eradication of Israel, but I'm here to tell you that if you think that, you'd be wrong. I'm not anti-Jewish. I'm not anti-Semitic. I do not want the eradication of Israel. Here's what I do want. I want the ability to tell my story, my ancestors' story, my grandparents' story, my mother's story, without being labeled anti-Semitic. I want a global political recognition of the real underlying issues of the conflict in the Holy Land being located in British imperialism and violent Zionism in the decades leading up to the crisis created by the Nakba of 1948. And I want that political recognition so that a political solution to the crisis that continues to unfold before our eyes now with such particular violence and horror and harm against innocent Palestinians, I want a political solution that gives Palestinians voice, dignity, and equality. I want the ability to tell my story without being labeled anti-Semitic. I want a global political recognition of the real underlying issues of the conflict in the Holy Land so that a political solution to the crisis that can be found that gives Palestinians voice, dignity, and equality. That's all I want. Number 8. The following men, and they're all men, I don't know why I don't have any women on this list, were or are supporters of Palestinian rights. Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, Albert Einstein, Mahatma Gandhi, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Jimmy Carter, James Baldwin, all of the above or none of the above? All of the above. I can't trick you guys. Well done. All of the above. I don't have any particular stories to tell here, but I love this list. Right? What a diversity of backgrounds, right? You've got Jews, you've got Muslims, you've got Christians, you've got people from all over the world. We've got our own Anglican hero in Bishop Tutu, who knew a thing or two about apartheid himself, and he himself called the system of oppression in Israel against Palestinians apartheid. We've got the late Jimmy Carter and the magnificent Ta-Nehisi Coates, whose recent book, The Message, I believe it's called, has a whole section about his experience and understanding of apartheid in Palestine and Israel, so I certainly encourage you to read that. So in order to hopefully leave some time to spare for questions, I have another list of folks here. The following people are Palestinian Anglicans or Episcopalians: Hassam Naum, Leanne Nasir, Samuel Fanous, Margot Habibi, Marianne Albina, Yazid Saeed, Sari Atik, all of the above or none of the above. This is all of the above. This is all of the above. And who are these people? Why am I giving you this random list of people, right? The first, number 8, you knew all those names. You probably don't know any of these names except for maybe one on this list. So all of these people are Palestinian Anglicans or Episcopalians. If they have a cross near their name, a little plus sign, they are clergy. If they don't have a cross near their name, they are lay people. They're lay Episcopalians or lay Anglicans. The people from D down are Palestinian Christians Palestinian Anglicans who live in the diaspora. That is to say, they don't live in the Holy Land anymore. The people from A through C are Palestinian Episcopalians in the Holy Land, right? Why do I give you this list? Because I've been in the church a long time now, and I go to these conventions, I go to General Convention, I go to Diocesan Conventions, and a lot of times if and when Palestine comes up, I hear a lot of bishops, mostly bishops, but I hear a lot of people talk about Archbishop Hassam Naum. He's that first one on the list with the 2 plus signs before his name. You know that means he's very important, right? And that's because he's the Archbishop of Jerusalem. And the Diocese of Jerusalem, the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, encompasses Palestine, Israel, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. It's a whole huge geographic region, right? And when I go to conventions and I hear bishops particularly talk about Palestine, they always talk about Archbishop Naum. They always call upon him to speak for his people, and they refer and defer to him all the time. They say, we are looking to Archbishop Hassam. Whatever he says, we'll say, right? And that's great. He's a great guy. I really like him, right? I think he's a good dude. But there are a lot more Palestinian Christians in the world than just this one person. And we know enough about anti-racism in the church to know that you can't go around tokenizing one person to represent an entire group, right? It is so important that we listen to Palestinian Christians, not just this one dude. lovely as he may be, but all Palestinian Christians. Why is that so important? Because look, he's the Archbishop of Jerusalem. He has to travel to these parishes all around his diocese that are outside of Israel proper. If he says the wrong thing and pisses the Israeli government off, they're not going to let him go. They're not going to let him get to Lebanon or to Syria. They may not even let him go from the West Bank to Gaza, right? So he is very constrained and limited in what he can say because he has pastoral responsibility and duty to the people that he is pastorally responsible for. So if we are only paying attention to one man, we are missing a whole bunch of the story. And that is also true for Episcopalians in the Holy Land in general, right? You see the name Samuel Fanous here. He's a clergy person. He's a priest in the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem. And he, too, is limited and constrained in ways that clergy have to be by his pastoral responsibility. Leanne Nasir is a layperson at St. John's Church, and she was recently imprisoned for months on end for no reason, right? She's an Episcopalian, just like you and me. And Israel just kidnapped her from her home and kept her in prison. And she is still facing legal battles. She has been released, but there is a chance that she will go back to prison for no reason. She's a political prisoner. Right? They don't have any reason to keep her. So this is why it's important to listen not only to other Palestinian Christians in the Holy Land, but Palestinian Christians like me who live in the diaspora. Because we have the privilege and the power of being able to say these things out loud and speak the truth without living under the oppression of Israeli apartheid. Right? We have the power to do that when our Christian siblings in the Holy Land don't. So it's so important that we pay attention to Palestinian Christians both in the Holy Land and living in the diaspora. And then finally, number 10, the Episcopal Church was among the first churches in the West to condemn the slaughter of innocent civilians in Palestine in the weeks after October 7th and to call for a ceasefire. Like Pope Francis, may he rest in peace, has called Israel's actions in Palestine terrorism, has taken effective steps to educate our members about our Palestinian siblings in the Holy Land, both in recent months and throughout the past decades, all of the above or none of the above. None of the above. None of the above. The Episcopal Church is one of the worst, if not the absolute worst, among the progressive liberal denominations of Christianity in the West. Are the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the United Church of Christ, the Lutherans. The Lutherans are great, but the Episcopal Church has remained silent at best. Until last week, when Bishop Thomas Brown of Maine, God love him, finally put out a public statement, right? But, I mean, it's just one. We got the bishops of North Carolina. They came on board, too, soon after Bishop Thomas Brown. But we're 18 months since October 7th, and those horrors were 77 years since 1948, and the Episcopal Church has been silent at best, and particularly and egregiously harmful to Palestinians, Palestinian Christians, Palestinians in our own church at worst. I do have some stories to tell about that, but I'm going to save those for this afternoon's book event, so I invite you to come back there then, and maybe we have 5 minutes for
Time
some
for a
questions.
question or two. So, Leyla, thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing your story. So as we await any questions from the audience, I thought we'd start with an easy one. How can we stay in relationship with Jews and Israelis who view the war as fundamentally through a lens of self-defense?
Yeah, that's a good question, and a hard one in some way. The Episcopal Church and Christianity, the church in general, right, Christianity, has a long, very real history of anti-Semitism, by which I mean anti-Judaism, right? And we have to take that seriously, and we have to grapple with that in our history, and in many cases in our current reality as well, right? That anti-Semitism is rooted in some really evil ways in the system of the church. That is true. And we have to also acknowledge and investigate how and when our deep desire to avoid anti-Semitism results in a different kind of anti-Semitism, which is to say racism against Palestinians and Arabs in general, right? Because there's a difference between being anti-Semitic and being anti-Israeli, right, in terms of that, that difference between Israel of the Bible and Israel as a government, or even like anti-Israeli government. Like, to criticize the Israeli government is not to be anti-Semitic, and we have to begin to uncouple those things, even though we live in a society that really doesn't want us to. Why do I say that? I say that because a lot of times what you will hear from our Jewish allies or our friends is that, well, you can't criticize Israel, right? This is all self-defense. Like, you can't criticize Israel. And what that does is that it absolutely silences the Palestinian voice. If the requirement from our Jewish allies, if in order to get them to the table, we have to be proponents of Zionism, in order to keep them at the table and to have their voice, their requirement of us is that we take away, we deny that voice at the table from Palestinians, then we have a problem. And we have to stop prioritizing the Jewish voice over and against the Palestinian voice. That is not fair, and it's not right. Right? So, and that's hard, I think, for us to hear in the society in which we live, because we have been so ingrained to prioritize our Jewish allyship above all else. And in a lot of ways for good reason, because we have this history of anti-Semitism, right? So it's not like it's a nefarious reason. But in the world we live in today, we have to do better about acknowledging what other voices are out there that have been purposefully silenced. And if the requirement for keeping Jews at the table is that Palestinians are not allowed there, that is not okay, right? And obviously, I mean, I hope I don't have to say this. I really hope that this is extravagant for me to say, but I'll say it anyways. Obviously, mass starvation of a whole people while bombing them and shooting at them is not self-defense, right? Like that, hopefully that is obvious to you, yeah? So, I mean, I don't know what else to say to that. Like I don't know what else to say to that. If that is not obvious to you, then if that is not obvious to you, then I don't know how else to answer that question.
Thank you so much, Leyla. We're almost at time, but just in closing, what can we do?
What can you do? That's also a great question. So the first thing you can do is listen to Palestinian Christians, right? And again, please listen to Palestinian Christians in the Holy Land. And there are people, and I will have a list for you. In fact, if you go to the PACA website, I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we will get up a list on social media of who you can listen to in the Holy Land. But please be aware and be careful and make sure that you're also listening to diaspora voices as well, because of all the reasons I've already outlined. And then the other thing you can do is share those stories. So don't just take them in yourself. Keep them going. Give them their own platform, right? And here's the hard thing. Those people that you run across in the church, in your life, who have been taken in by the Zionist narrative and who come at you with that language and that rhetoric, try really hard to give them grace. Try really hard, if at all possible, if it doesn't do you harm, because you're in a much better position than I am, because they could do me harm as a Palestinian. But if you're not Palestinian, maybe they won't do you so much harm. So as much as you are able, stay in relationship with them. Take them out to coffee. Tell them the stories you know about Palestinian Christians, about Palestinians in general. Because those stories are so important. And if you sit here and you tell them all the rhetoric, right? Free Palestine, from the river to the sea, all that sort of stuff, which I believe, right? But if you tell them that, they're just going to turn off. They're not going to listen to you. Because then you just have all the rhetoric from this side facing all the rhetoric from that side, and it goes nowhere. The world is transformed by being in relationship with one another. So be in relationship with people who don't understand and continue to tell these stories over and over and over again. Buy my book for them, right? Let's get that guy my book. That would be great. Thank you.
Leyla, thank you again,
Thank
and we'll
you
look
so
forward
much.
to hearing from you at 11 and at 3 p.m.
3 o'clock. Thank
Go in
you.
peace.